All right, so get this. The State Department might be buying a fleet of Tesla Cybertrucks.
Whoa, really?
Yeah, a potential $400 million deal
Wow.
for armored vehicles.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah, and it's raising some serious questions.
I bet. I mean, usually when you think armored vehicles, you think something a little
Yeah.
more traditional, right? Not
Yeah.
exactly a
Is it
Tesla.
not your typical motorcade?
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole thing so interesting, right?
Totally.
So our main source for this deep dive is this CBS News article,
Okay.
and it highlights Senator Blumenthal's concerns about this potential purchase.
All right, so Senator Blumenthal, he's not holding back.
No, not at all.
The article says he's calling the Cybertruck widely derided,
Uh-oh.
and he's pointing to those 6 recalls it's had since its release.
Yeah, I remember hearing about those.
And then there are those less-than-stellar sales figures.
Yeah, they haven't exactly been flying off the lots.
But shouldn't the government look beyond just sales numbers when making these kinds of decisions?
You'd think so, right?
Right.
But with government contracts, especially huge ones like this,
Yeah.
they do consider things like a company's track record
Uh-huh.
and financial stability. If a product isn't selling well, it can raise concerns about whether the company can deliver
Right.
what they're promising on time and within budget.
Interesting. So those disastrous sales figures Blumenthal mentioned,
Yeah,
they might actually hold more weight than you'd think.
they could, definitely.
But let's be honest, the Cybertruck is just one piece of this puzzle. It feels like there's a much bigger story here.
Absolutely. This isn't just about picking a car.
Right.
This gets tangled up with Elon Musk's, shall we say, diverse portfolio.
Right, exactly.
He's not just the CEO of Tesla.
Nope.
He's also running SpaceX, owns X, formerly Twitter,
Oh, yeah, X.
and has this whole Department of Government Efficiency thing going on.
Right, the DOGE initiative. Basically, he's on a mission to cut government spending,
Yeah.
going as far as digging into agencies' systems
Uh-huh.
to root out what he sees as wasteful spending.
And that's where things get really interesting.
Okay, how so?
Well, because DOGE isn't an official government agency.
What?
Yeah, it's more like Musk's personal project.
Wow.
And there have been legal challenges questioning his authority to be doing all this.
Really?
One case, for example, involved a group of researchers
Okay.
who argued that Musk's access to sensitive data through DOGE violated privacy laws
Interesting.
and lacked proper oversight.
Okay, so we've got potential privacy violations and questions about overreach.
Uh-huh.
But hold on. How does this all tie back to the Cybertruck?
Right.
It feels like we're jumping between storylines.
Well, we are, and that's the crux of Senator Blumenthal's argument.
Okay.
He's pointing out a major potential conflict of interest here.
Okay, I'm listening.
Musk is pushing for government cuts
Right.
while also standing to gain from a massive government contract.
So it's like he's saying, let's cut spending everywhere,
Yeah,
except for the money we're giving to my company.
exactly.
That's pretty bold.
It definitely raises eyebrows.
Yeah.
And remember, this isn't happening in a vacuum. There's a whole political layer to this as well.
Right, because Blumenthal, a Democrat, is directing his questions to Secretary of State Marco Rubio,
Yep.
who was a big supporter of Trump.
Uh-huh.
And we know Musk was a significant donor to the Trump campaign as well.
Exactly. So you see how this adds another layer of political intrigue, right?
For sure.
And to make things even spicier,
Uh-oh.
Blumenthal has given Rubio a deadline of February 21st to respond.
So we might have a public showdown brewing.
Could be.
This is starting to feel like a political thriller.
I know, right?
But before we go down that rabbit hole, let's take a step back
Okay,
and look at the Cybertruck itself.
good point.
We need to understand what these armored vehicles are actually supposed to do.
Yeah.
And whether the Cybertruck can even meet those requirements, because on the surface, it seems like a bizarre choice.
Yeah,
Blumenthal even called them widely derided, remember?
I do.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well,
Is the Cybertruck really that bad, or is there more to it?
I think there's more to it.
Okay, like what?
Well, let's unpack that widely derided statement.
Okay.
We need to remember these aren't just any vehicles.
Right.
They're meant for diplomatic security.
Yeah.
So you're talking to protecting people in potentially hostile environments,
Uh-huh.
maybe even needing to withstand attacks.
That's intense.
There's a lot more to it than just driving around looking cool.
So bulletproof glass,
Oh, yeah.
reinforced chassis,
Definitely.
maybe some hidden compartments.
Oh, I like where you're going with this.
For, emergency champagne.
Maybe not the champagne, but you're on the right track.
Okay.
Think about the kinds of threats these vehicles are designed for.
Yeah.
Attacks, explosions, difficult terrain.
Right.
It's not just a daily commute.
Got it. Serious business.
Yeah,
But can the Cybertruck actually handle all that?
that's the question.
I mean, it does have that futuristic stainless steel exoskeleton.
Yeah.
And Tesla claims it's super durable.
Right?
They've talked about its off-road capabilities.
Uh-huh.
Could that actually be a good fit for this kind of work?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Right.
On paper, it's not impossible
Okay.
that exoskeleton could provide some serious protection,
Yeah.
and the off-road capabilities could be useful in certain situations.
Yeah, true.
But we have to remember, there's no real-world track record
Right.
for the Cybertruck in this kind of role.
Whereas the Suburban Shield program that the State Department already has with GM Defense,
Right.
they've already delivered the first vehicle.
They have, yeah.
And it's based on the Suburban, which has been around forever.
Yeah, forever.
And has a reputation for being reliable.
Exactly.
And that program's already underway,
Yeah.
working within a budget of $300 million over 10 years.
Right.
So on the surface, it does seem odd
It does.
that the State Department would even consider such a large purchase
Yeah.
of a vehicle that hasn't proven itself in this field.
You're right. It does seem strange.
So that brings us back to the whole Elon Musk thing.
Yeah.
Even if the Cybertruck could potentially do the job,
Right.
there's still the issue of his multiple roles
Uh-huh.
and the potential for those lines to blur.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder what's really driving this decision.
This is where things get murky.
Okay.
Imagine the State Department does go with the Cybertruck.
Okay.
It's going to be hard to escape the perception
Yeah.
that Musk's position with DOGE and his push for budget cuts played a role,
So for the average person out there, why should they care
right?
about a government contract for some fancy armored vehicles?
Good question.
Seems pretty far removed from everyday life.
You know, this is where we need to connect the dots
Okay.
to the bigger picture.
Okay.
Think about it. We're seeing more and more tech billionaires with their hands in government affairs.
Right.
This situation, regardless of the outcome, is a prime example
Okay.
of that growing influence.
Okay, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
So it's not just about one contract.
No.
It's about setting a precedent for
Right here.
how much influence these individuals
I
and
know.
corporations can have
Uh-huh.
in government decisions
Right.
and how that might impact everyone,
Yeah.
not just diplomats needing a ride.
Precisely. It raises questions about accountability, transparency,
Yeah,
and whose interests are truly being served.
right.
If decisions are driven by personal gain rather than public good,
Mm-hmm.
that impacts us all.
So what can we, the average citizens, actually do about it?
That's a good question.
Blumenthal's making noise, but is that enough?
It's a start, for sure.
Okay,
Public scrutiny is vital.
right.
It forces those empowered to answer for their actions.
Yeah,
But we also need to look at the system itself.
okay.
What kind of regulations and ethical guidelines
Uh-huh.
can prevent these conflicts of interest from arising?
So more transparency in how these contracts are awarded,
Yes.
clearer rules about who can hold these positions of power and influence.
Right.
Because right now it feels like the rules of the game are a little fuzzy,
They do.
and those with enough money and clout
Yeah.
can kind of bend them to their advantage.
That's a great point.
Right.
The rules need to be clear, fair,
Yeah.
and apply equally to everyone.
Makes sense.
Otherwise, you risk eroding public trust in the whole system.
Okay, back to the Cybertruck drama.
Okay.
What's the next act in this story?
Right.
We know Blumenthal's given Rubio until February 21st to respond.
He has.
What are we expecting to see happen?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Will Rubio address the concerns
Uh-huh.
about the Cybertruck's reliability
Yeah.
and Musk's potential conflicts of interest head on?
Right.
Or will he try to sidestep the issue?
Yeah.
And how will that play out in the media and public opinion?
It's like we're all waiting for the next episode to drop.
Oh, no, right?
But there's another piece of this puzzle that I haven't quite wrapped my head around.
Oh, what's that?
This Department of Government Efficiency.
Right, DOGE.
Yeah, DOGE, it's not an official agency.
Right.
But Musk seems to have a lot of power there.
He does.
How does that even work?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
And it gets to the heart of this situation.
Okay.
We've talked about potential conflicts of interest,
Yeah.
but there's also the question of legitimacy.
Okay.
Who authorized Musk
Right.
to have access to government systems and data in this way?
And what's the end goal here?
Yeah.
Is it really about eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse?
Right.
Or is there another agenda at play?
Yeah, it feels a little unsettling, this
Yeah.
idea of a private individual essentially auditing government agencies.
It's almost like we're outsourcing government oversight
Right.
to the highest bidder.
Yeah.
And that just doesn't feel right.
It speaks to a broader concern
Okay.
about the blurring lines between private power and public governments.
Mhm.
We need to consider the implications carefully.
So it's not just about the Cybertruck, is it?
No, it's not.
It's about defining the appropriate role of
Exactly.
private individuals and corporations in shaping public policy.
Absolutely. And those are the kinds of conversations we
Yeah.
need to be having as a society.
Right, because these issues aren't going away anytime soon.
No, they're not.
So we've covered the Cybertruck, the political drama,
Yep.
and the DOGE initiative.
Uh-huh.
Is there anything else we need to consider in this deep dive?
Well, there's one more piece of the puzzle
Oh, okay.
we need to examine.
Okay, what is it?
The CBS article mentioned that Tesla has had disastrous sales figures for the Cybertruck.
Right, but this is a government contract.
Yeah.
Shouldn't sales figures be irrelevant in this case?
Necessarily.
Okay, why not?
Remember what we talked about earlier?
Uh-huh.
Government contracts, particularly massive ones,
Yeah.
are often influenced by factors beyond just the product itself.
So those disastrous sales figures
Right?
could signal deeper issues
They could.
with Tesla's ability to meet the demands of this contract.
Exactly. It raises questions about their production capabilities,
Okay.
their financial stability,
Right.
their ability to deliver on time and within budget.
Mm-hmm.
These are all things the State Department should be taking into account.
But wouldn't that information be readily available to them?
You would think so.
Yeah.
Surely they wouldn't be considering a contract
Right.
without doing their due diligence,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Ideally, yes.
Okay.
But the reality is
Yeah.
government procurement processes can be very complex
Uh-huh.
and sometimes opaque.
Interesting.
There's often a lot of behind-the-scenes maneuvering
Okay.
and political influence at play.
So it's possible
It is.
they might be overlooking
Yeah.
or downplaying these concerns about Tesla's track record
They might be.
in order to push through this deal.
It's not outside the realm of possibility.
Wow.
And that's why transparency and accountability are so crucial in these processes.
Right.
We need to be able to see how these decisions are being made
Uh-huh.
and who's influencing them.
This is getting more complicated by the minute.
It is, a little bit.
So we've got a vehicle with a questionable track record,
Yeah.
a company with potentially shaky financials,
Uh-huh.
a CEO with conflicting roles,
Yeah.
and a government agency that might not be as thorough as they should be.
Right.
Where do we even go from here?
It is a tangled web, but that's why we're taking this deep dive, right? To
Yeah.
try and untangle it and make sense of it all.
Yeah.
And to help you, our listener, understand the nuances of this situation.
Okay, so let's shift gears for a moment
Okay.
and talk about the potential impact
All right.
of this purchase.
Okay.
If the State Department does go ahead with this Cybertruck deal,
Right.
what could it mean for the future of armored vehicles,
Uh-huh.
government procurement,
Yeah.
and even the automotive industry as a whole?
That's a great question.
Yeah,
And it's one that experts have been debating ever since this story broke.
I bet.
There are definitely some potential pros and cons to consider.
Okay, let's start with the pros.
All right.
What's the best case scenario here?
Well, some argue this could be a game changer
Right.
for the armored vehicle market.
How so?
Well, the Cybertruck, with its futuristic design
Yeah,
and electric powertrain,
right.
is a radical departure from the traditional
Yeah.
gas-guzzling, boxy vehicles.
I know, the ones we're used to seeing.
Exactly.
So if it proved to be successful,
Yeah,
it could push the whole industry
it could.
towards more sustainable and technologically advanced options.
Exactly. It could force other manufacturers to up their game
Okay.
and innovate to keep up with Tesla.
Interesting.
And that could lead to some exciting advancements in the field.
That's an interesting perspective, but what about the potential downsides?
Right.
We can't just ignore those, can we?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
And that's where the concerns about setting a dangerous precedent
Uh-huh.
for government procurement come in.
Explain that a little further. What are the potential risks here?
Well, if the State Department is willing to overlook these concerns about Tesla's track record
Yeah.
and potential conflicts of interest
Right.
to secure a flashy new vehicle,
Uh-huh.
it sends a message to other companies.
What kind of message?
It's okay to cut corners
Oh, wow.
and play fast and loose with the rules.
So it could create a culture where getting the contract
Yeah.
is more important than actually being able to deliver
Exactly.
on the promises you've made.
Exactly. And that could erode public trust in the government's ability
Yeah.
to make sound decisions
Right.
and spend taxpayer money wisely.
So it's not just about the Cybertruck itself, it's about the principles and values
Right.
that guide our government and
Yeah.
our society as a whole.
Precisely. And that's what makes this story so important.
Okay.
It forces us to confront fundamental questions about power,
Right.
accountability, and the role of technology in our lives.
Right. And those are conversations we need to keep having.
We d-
No matter how this Cybertruck saga ultimately plays out.
I couldn't agree more.
Okay, so we've talked about the Cybertruck,
Yeah.
amongst various roles,
Uh-huh.
the political and historical context,
Right.
and the potential implications of this purchase.
Yeah.
Is there anything else we need to add to this deep dive?
Well, I think it's important to remember this is still a developing story,
Meaning?
meaning we don't have all the answers yet.
Okay.
There's a lot of information
Yeah.
that's still unknown or unclear.
Like what?
Well, for starters,
Yeah.
we don't know for sure if the State Department
Right.
is actually going to go through with this Cybertruck purchase.
Right. It's just a possibility at this point.
Exactly. And even if they do decide to move forward,
Yeah.
there are still a lot of details that need to be worked out.
Like what kinds of details?
Well, like the specific features and modifications that will
Mm-hmm.
be required for these armored vehicles,
Right.
the production timeline,
Okay.
the delivery schedule,
Mm-hmm.
the total cost of the contract.
So there's still a lot of uncertainty
There is.
surrounding this whole situation.
Absolutely. And that's why it's important to stay tuned
Right.
and follow the developments as they unfold.
Because this story could have major implications
It could.
for the future of armored vehicles, government procurement,
Yeah,
and the role of tech billionaires in our society.
exactly. It's a story that's worth paying attention to.
Okay, so we've got a potential government contract that's raising a lot of eyebrows,
We
a
do.
CEO with his fingers in a lot of pies,
Uh-huh.
and a whole lot of unanswered questions
Yeah,
about the future of armored vehicles
right.
and government procurement.
It's a complex and multifaceted story,
It is.
but one that we need to understand
Yeah.
in order to make informed decisions about the future of our society.
So what's the takeaway for our listeners?
Right.
What should they be thinking about as they process all this information?
Well, I think the most important thing is to stay engaged,
Okay.
informed, and critical.
Uh-huh.
Don't just accept things at face value.
Right.
Ask questions, challenge assumptions,
Yep.
and demand transparency and accountability from those in power.
Because ultimately the future up to us.
Exactly.
Well, on that note, I think we've covered just about everything.
I think so.
Any final thoughts before we wrap things up?
That's one.
Okay.
This whole situation with the Cybertruck and Elon Musk's multiple roles
Yeah.
raises a fundamental question.
Okay.
What is the appropriate level of influence
Uh-huh.
for private individuals and corporations
Right.
in government affairs?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
And it's one that we as a society need to grapple with.
Because the answers will have far-reaching consequences
Yeah.
for the future of our democracy.
All right, folks, there you have it.
Uh-huh.
The Cybertruck controversy, a deep dive into the murky world of government contracts,
Right.
tech billionaires, and the quest for accountability.
And as always, we encourage you to continue exploring this story
Yes.
and forming your own conclusions.
This whole Cybertruck situation, it really makes you think, it goes way beyond just a car purchase.
It's like a case study, right?
Yeah.
It holds up a magnifying glass to how our government operates,
Mm-hmm.
who's really pulling the strings,
Yeah.
and what drives these big decisions.
And it brings in so many different factors.
Oh, it does.
Like technology, politics.
Money, even ethics.
Yeah, and it really challenges our assumptions about what government efficiency really means.
It does, doesn't it?
Right, because on one hand, you have Musk and DOGE pushing for these cost cuts above everything else.
Yeah.
But then you have this existing contract with GM Defense,
Right.
which might be more expensive,
Yeah.
but it's a known quantity.
It is.
It's a vehicle with a solid track record.
Exactly.
So how do you balance those competing priorities?
That's the question, right?
Especially when you're talking about millions of taxpayer dollars.
Billions, it forces us to ask, what are we really measuring here?
Yeah, like what's the metric?
Is it purely about the bottom line?
Right.
Or are there other considerations like
Yeah.
national security and
And
support?
like American industries.
Even just the optics of who the government chooses to do business with.
And let's not forget about the human factor. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
these are vehicles designed to protect people
Yeah.
in some really dangerous situations.
Right.
So reliability and safety
Yeah.
have to be top priorities.
They do. They absolutely do.
No matter what company wins the contract.
Right.
So this isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet.
No.
It's about real lives.
Real lives, exactly.
At stake, and that adds another layer of complexity to all of this.
Absolutely, it does.
So for our listeners who've been with us on this deep dive
Yeah.
into the Cybertruck controversy,
Yeah.
what's the one thing they should walk away thinking about?
I'd say this. The next time you hear about a big government contract,
Okay.
don't just focus on the dollar amount
Okay.
or the company involved.
Right.
Dig a little deeper.
Right.
Ask yourself, what factors might be at play here?
Okay.
Who stands to gain?
Yeah.
And how does this decision impact the bigger picture?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because in a democracy,
Yeah.
how our government operates, it matters to all of us.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And maybe, just maybe,
Yeah.
this whole Cybertruck debate will spark a bigger
I
conversation
hope so.
about how we define government efficiency,
Yeah.
how much influence private individuals should have,
Yeah.
and what we expect from our elected officials.
That would certainly be a positive outcome.
Right. A little more informed debate on these issues.
Yeah. Never a bad thing.
Well, on that note, we'll leave you to ponder all this.
Okay.
Keep your eyes peeled for any updates on this story.
Right.
Because we're sure to see more twists and turns along the way.
Definitely.
And until next time, keep diving deep.
And stay curious.
And we'll see you on the next deep dive.
See you then.